whose very presence made the air shimmer with heat and light, whose decisions shaped the kingdom, and whose choice of partner would determine succession and future of the realm. Below him stood the marked nobility, those blessed by totems with visible symbols and supernatural abilities, warriors and mystics and scholars whose divine connections granted them privilege and authority. No hope of ever rising above their station. Among these unmarked lived a woman named Lina, a scholar who worked in the great library cataloging ancient texts, brilliant and dedicated but utterly powerless by any measure that mattered in Solmara's hierarchy. She had no mark, no divine connection, no supernatural abilities whatsoever. She was by every standard the kingdom valued nothing special, someone who would live and die in obscurity, contributing quietly to knowledge, but never recognized or honored for her work. Then came the day the Sun King himself walked into the library seeking information for a crucial decision, and when he announced 3 months later that he had chosen Lina as his queen, that he would marry this unmarked scholar rather than any of the powerful marked women who had been competing for his attention, the entire kingdom was thrown into chaos and disbelief. She had no power, no mark, no divine connection, yet the Sun King had chosen her anyway, declaring that true worth was not measured by visible symbols or supernatural abilities. This is their story. The kingdom of Solmara had been founded 5 centuries ago by warriors marked by the solar lion, but prosperity had created rigidity. Success had bred arrogance. That intermarriage between marked and unmarked was forbidden as dilution of divine bloodlines. The system was presented as natural order, divine will made manifest through marks and power, and most people accepted it because they had never known anything different. He was 30 now, powerful and commanding. His solar lion, he took his responsibilities seriously, worked tirelessly for the kingdom's benefit, and was generally respected, if not universally loved by his subjects. But he was also lonely and increasingly disillusioned with the marked elite who surrounded him. The nobles were concerned primarily with maintaining and increasing their own power, viewing kingdom's welfare as secondary to personal advantage, calculating and political in ways that left him cold despite their power and beauty. He had been resisting pressure to choose a queen for 5 years now, making excuses about needing time to evaluate candidates carefully, about wanting to ensure succession was secured through right partnership rather than hasty decision. Darius knew he could not delay much longer. That duty demanded he choose someone and begin securing succession, finding solace in ancient texts and scholarly discussions about history and philosophy. The library was one of Solmara's greatest treasures, vast collection of manuscripts and scrolls gathered over centuries, maintained by dedicated scholars who preserved knowledge regardless of whether it had immediate practical application. Their work valued, but they themselves considered servants rather than intellectuals worthy of respect. That he first truly noticed Lina. She had been helping him find relevant texts for weeks, efficient and knowledgeable, directing him to sources he would never have found alone, offering insights that demonstrated deep understanding of historical context and patterns. He had been reading about early Sun Kings, noting how they had consolidated power by ensuring only marked individuals held authority, and he had commented aloud that this seemed wise given that divine selection obviously indicated superior capabilities. Her natural scholarly instinct to correct inaccuracies overriding her usual caution around powerful people. "That is not what the texts actually say, Your Majesty," she said. "The historical record shows many crucial innovations and developments came from unmarked individuals, that military victories often depended on unmarked soldiers following unmarked strategists' plans, that the kingdom's agricultural and economic systems were designed primarily by unmarked administrators in third and fourth generations to justify increasingly rigid hierarchies that excluded unmarked from power. The original Sun Kings worked with marked and unmarked together, valuing contribution regardless of its source." Darius had stared at her. "You are correct," he said slowly. "I have been reading these texts through lens of assumptions I was taught, rather than engaging with what they actually say. That is sloppy scholarship, and I should be embarrassed for claiming to value learning while failing at such basic intellectual honesty." She had relaxed slightly at his acknowledgment, then offered him a tentative smile that transformed her face from merely pleasant to genuinely beautiful. "Few people, even scholars, are willing to reconsider their assumptions when presented with contradictory evidence," she said. "Your willingness to admit error suggests you value truth more than being right." By the combination of intellectual integrity and genuine humility she had displayed. Over the following weeks, he returned to the library regularly. Practical problems of governance. She was, he discovered, remarkably brilliant, possessing depth and breadth of knowledge that rivaled the kingdom's most educated marked scholars. But more importantly, she approached learning as genuine pursuit of understanding, rather than as performance or tool for advancement. She was interested in ideas for their own sake, engaged with questions because they were interesting, rather than because answering them would benefit her somehow. Their conversations challenged Darius in ways he had not experienced since childhood, when his tutors had still been willing to push back against his assumptions rather than simply affirming whatever he said. Lina treated him as intellectual equal rather than as superior being, disagreed with him when she thought he was wrong. It was exhausting and exhilarating simultaneously. Who made him think harder and feel more engaged than anyone else in his life? Darius realized he had fallen in love. Not the political calculation or physical attraction that passed for love in court circles, but genuine deep affection based on knowing someone and being known by them, on intellectual and emotional connection that made him feel more complete and more himself when he was with her. The realization was terrifying because of its implications. He was Sun King. He was supposed to marry marked woman from powerful family, producing marked heirs who would continue dynasty. Choosing Lina would challenge 5 centuries of tradition and precedent, would provoke opposition from marked elite who viewed unmarked as inherently inferior. But the more he considered it, the more he became convinced that choosing Lina was not just what he wanted personally, but what the kingdom needed. The rigid hierarchy that excluded unmarked from meaningful participation in governance was weakening the kingdom, creating resentment and inefficiency, wasting talent and potential simply because it came from people without visible divine connections. Marrying Lina would send message that worth was not determined solely by marks, that contribution and character mattered as much as supernatural abilities, that the kingdom valued all its citizens rather than just marked elite. It would be controversial and difficult, but it would also be right in ways that transcended personal preference. He began preparing carefully, building support among more reform-minded nobles, trying to determine if she felt anything for him beyond the respect and intellectual engagement she showed so consistently. 3 months after realizing he loved her, Darius asked Lina to meet him in the library's private study chambers after hours, where they could speak without being overheard or interrupted. Clearly worried that she had somehow offended him, or that her intellectual equality might have crossed lines she had not meant to cross. He began carefully acknowledging the power imbalance between them, and shown me that intelligence and insight exist independent of divine marks and supernatural power. You have made me question assumptions I did not know I was making, reconsider positions I thought were settled, think more carefully about what leadership and governance actually require. But more than that, you have made me feel seen and known as person rather than as position or symbol. I am simply Darius, someone trying to understand complex world and make good decisions. That is gift I did not know I needed until you provided it. He paused, gathering courage, then continued with complete honesty. I have fallen in love with you. I love the way you make me better by expecting more of me than I expect of myself, the way you challenge me while also respecting me. I love who I am when I am with you, and I want to be with you for the rest of my life. I want to marry you, Lina. I want you as my queen, my partner in governance, my companion in learning and life. I know this creates enormous complications. Our children may not be marked, which creates succession questions. But I believe you are right choice regardless of these complications. Will you marry me? Will you accept these challenges and complications because you believe, as I do, that we can build something together that matters more than preserving traditions that were never as rigid as people now claim? The enormity of it overwhelming her ability to respond coherently. She sat down heavily, breathing fast and shallow like someone in shock, her face cycling through disbelief and fear, and something that might have been hope before settling on profound uncertainty. Your Majesty, she finally managed, I do not know what to say. I am unmarked scholar, invisible to most people, considered inferior by every standard your kingdom values. You are Sun King, most powerful person in realm, bearer of strongest solar landmark in generations. A gap between us is so vast, I cannot comprehend how you even think of crossing it. Yes, I have grown to care for you deeply during our conversations, but I assumed those feelings were inappropriate and impossible. Terrified that I am inadequate to requirements, that I will fail you and the kingdom, that the opposition you mention will be too strong to overcome, that I will be destroyed by attempt to rise so far above my station. What I am proposing is unprecedented and will face enormous resistance. But I have thought through the practical challenges, and I believe we can overcome them with planning and dedication. More importantly, I believe you underestimate yourself dramatically. Wisdom, integrity, genuine commitment to truth and learning and service. Those qualities make you better suited to be queen than any marked noble woman whose primary qualification is divine symbol on her skin and family connections. It needs queen who can think clearly, who values all citizens rather than just marked elite, who will govern with wisdom rather than simply maintaining systems that benefit those already in power. You have those qualities, Lina. You have everything that actually matters for this role. But I will not force this on you. If you do not want to marry me, If you think the challenges are too great, or if you simply do not love me enough to face them together, then say so and we part as friends. I will not punish you or make your life difficult for refusing. This must be choice you make freely, without coercion or fear of consequences. Take time to think about it if you need. Talk to people you trust. Your answer matters, Lina, but only if it is truly your answer rather than what you think you should say. She looked at him for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to read his true intentions, then spoke with characteristic honesty. I do love you, she said quietly. I have loved you for months without admitting it, even to myself, because it seemed so impossible and foolish. When you arrive, my entire day brightens, becomes meaningful in ways ordinary work cannot match. You make me want to be better scholar, better thinker, better person, because you expect and deserve excellence. But I am also practical enough to understand that love is not the only consideration. That accepting your proposal means entering world I do not understand, taking on responsibilities I have not trained for, facing opposition that may be overwhelming. Darius accepted this completely, giving her the week she requested to consider his proposal seriously. I accept, she said without preamble. I accept your proposal. I accept the challenges and complications, because I am willing to risk failure for the possibility of actually making difference. But I have conditions. I need you to work with me on reforms that give unmarked citizens genuine voice and opportunity. Darius pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home, relief and joy flooding through him. Yes, he said emphatically, yes to all of it. And I will be honest with you always, because that is foundation for partnership. Thank you, Lina. Thank you for being brave enough to say yes, for trusting me and trusting yourself enough to take this risk. I promise you will not regret it. And together we will prove that worth is not measured by marks or supernatural abilities, but by character and contribution and wisdom to govern well. The announcement 3 days later, when Darius declared publicly that he had chosen Lina as his queen, sent shockwaves through Solmara's marked elite. The reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly negative. Nobles protesting that unmarked woman could not possibly be suitable queen, that this violated centuries of tradition, that succession would be compromised. But Darius stood firm, supported by reform-minded faction he had been cultivating, and his authority as Sun King made opposition difficult to translate into actual prevention. The wedding was scheduled for 3 months hence, time to adjust to revolutionary change in its leadership structure. The 3 months before the wedding were intense and difficult for both of them, facing constant opposition and pressure to reconsider the unprecedented marriage, each other as partners preparing for shared life, rather than as intellectual companions meeting in library for discussions that had boundaries and safe distance. Lina moved from her modest quarters in the scholars' wing into palace proper, assigned rooms in the royal family section that were larger than her entire previous living space. She began intensive education in protocol and court politics, learning hundreds of rules about who could be addressed directly versus through intermediaries, which social gatherings were mandatory versus optional, how to navigate conversations where every word carried political weight and implications beyond surface meaning. Her teachers were palace officials who had served for decades, and they approached her education with mix of professional dedication and obvious skepticism, about whether Unmarked scholar could possibly master complexities of court life. Some were kind and patient, genuinely trying to help her succeed despite their doubts. Others were subtly undermining, presenting information in ways designed to confuse or overwhelm, setting her up to make mistakes. Lina struggled constantly with imposter syndrome that went far beyond normal uncertainty about new role. Certain everyone could see she did not belong despite Darius's consistent reassurance that she was exactly right person for this position, required by protocol, while making clear. They would smile to her face while their eyes remained cold, would offer congratulations that sounded like condolences, would make comments that were technically proper but carried unmistakable implications that she was interloper violating traditions that should have remained inviolate. Lady Seraphine, a powerful duchess whose daughter had been competing for Sun King's attention, was particularly skilled at these subtle attacks. She would ask Lina questions about court history or noble genealogies that Lina could not answer, then express surprise that someone becoming queen did not know such basic information. She would offer to introduce Lina to important people, then position her in conversations where she would be obviously out of depth, unable to follow references or understand context that everyone else took for granted. Whether she was being selfish and foolish in accepting Darius's proposal rather than declining for the kingdom's good. His servants and unmarked palace staff were uncertain how to treat her, risen impossibly high, and recognizing that she now held position of power over them that required deference and formal respect. Seeing her, others were resentful, viewing her success as making their own positions seem like failures of ambition or ability, or simply jealous that she had been chosen by pure luck of catching Sun King's attention rather than through merit or hard work. Most were simply confused, unsure, or it was just an anomaly that would not alter fundamental realities of their positions. Her new position creating barrier that made honest conversation difficult. Only Darius's consistent support and presence kept her from breaking under the pressure and doubt, validating her feelings while also helping her see that the opposition. He reminded her repeatedly that she had been chosen precisely because she brought different perspective and approach than traditional queens, that the discomfort marked elite expressed was sign she was challenging comfortable arrangements, rather than evidence she was failing. Dealing with nobles who tried various strategies to prevent the marriage or minimize its significance, where he would need to actually share power rather than simply holding all authority himself, as Sun Kings traditionally did, who might see the marriage as sign. His uncle, a retired general who had advised Darius's father, was particularly vocal in opposition. What happens when enemies see that our Sun King values unmarked scholar over marked warriors? The general demanded, "What message does that send about what we value as kingdom? You think it shows enlightenment and wisdom. It sends message that we value wisdom and character over mere display of power, that divine marks are meaningful, but not the only measure of worth and capability. Our enemies should fear kingdom led by intelligent, thoughtful rulers more than kingdom led by powerful but foolish ones. And our own citizens, they will see that they matter, that their contribution, that is strategic strength, not weakness." But the conversations took their toll, forcing Darius to defend his choice repeatedly, to articulate rationales and address concerns, to manage relationships that had been comfortable and supportive, but which now carried tension and disappointment. The wedding ceremony itself was thousands gathering in Solmara's central plaza to witness unprecedented union of Sun King and Unmarked scholar. The plaza was decorated elaborately with golden banners and flame braziers, the solar lion's symbols everywhere, alongside scholarly motifs representing Lina's background, creating visual statement about integration and partnership that the marriage represented. Lina was and what their partnership represented beyond just political arrangement. Walking slowly through crowd toward the ceremonial platform where Darius waited, unmarked citizens and reform-minded nobles applauded enthusiastically, recognizing this as a historically significant moment that challenged centuries of rigid hierarchy. Permanent limitations. Darius waited at the altar with his solar lion mark blazing bright enough to cast shadows in midday sun. Everyone present could see the genuine love and respect flowing between them that made the ceremony about two people choosing each other rather than just arrangement, securing succession and alliance. To share power genuinely, rather than just making symbolic gestures toward inclusion, while maintaining all real authority. Lina promised to serve the kingdom with wisdom and dedication, to use her position to advocate for all citizens regardless of marks or status, to grow into queen's role while also maintaining intellectual integrity and honesty that had characterized her scholarship. Even skeptics had the sense that something genuinely significant was beginning, rather than simply traditions, being violated through foolish romantic impulse. Communal meals were organized where marked and unmarked citizens ate together in unprecedented mixing of social classes. The symbolic importance was not lost on anyone, requiring constant navigation of opposition and opportunities, setbacks and victories, slow gradual transformation of kingdom's culture and structures. Lina stepped into queen's role with determination and intelligence, opened opportunities for unmarked citizens who had been systematically excluded from meaningful participation in kingdom's leadership and advancement. She established education programs ensuring talented unmarked youth could access learning previously reserved for marked elite, institutionalizing their participation rather than making it dependent on individual rulers' personal preferences. She worked tirelessly to shift cultural narratives away from rigid hierarchies based on marks toward more inclusive understanding of worth and capability that recognized diverse forms of contribution and excellence. The opposition remained strong throughout these initiatives, nobles resisting changes that threatened their privileged positions and their children's assumed advantages, arguing that lowering standards to accommodate unmarked participants would weaken institutions and kingdom's overall capabilities. But Lina's obvious competence and dedication gradually won over even some skeptics who had initially dismissed her as unsuitable for queen's role, demonstrating through her own example that unmarked individuals could perform at highest levels when given opportunity and support, making space for multiple forms of excellence rather than insisting only one type counted, allowing her to cite historical precedents and present careful logical reasoning that was difficult to dismiss as emotional or political rather than substantive. Darius supported her reforms actively while also managing his own responsibilities as Sun King, and quoted for generations as articulation of principles that had guided their rule and partnership. The great hall was filled to capacity. Nobles and commoners alike gathered to witness this anniversary celebration, Lina stood beside Darius on the ceremonial platform, wearing Queen's regalia that had become familiar and comfortable, rather than the strange costume it had felt like initially. Her confidence and authority. She began by acknowledging the fear and doubt she had carried into this role, the certainty of inadequacy that had almost prevented her from accepting Darius's proposal, incompatible with authority and command. I had no noble training or background that would have prepared me for court politics and ceremonial requirements. I possessed no martial skills that would allow me to command respect of warriors and generals. By every measure that mattered in Solmara's rigid hierarchy, I was nothing, utterly unsuitable, fundamentally inadequate for the role I was being asked to fill. But Darius saw something I could not see in myself, something I needed years to fully recognize and accept, that true power is not measured solely by marks or supernatural abilities, but by wisdom and character and genuine commitment to service and justice. He saw that intelligence and integrity, dedication to truth and learning, willingness to challenge assumptions and think carefully about complex problems, these qualities were exactly what the throne needed, what the kingdom required to move beyond comfortable, but ultimately limiting traditions that excluded most of its citizens from meaningful participation in their own governance. Over 15 years we have proven together, through sustained effort and countless small victories and some painful setbacks, that worth exists independent of divine selection, that unmarked individuals can contribute as meaningfully and effectively as marked ones when given opportunity and support, that the kingdom is genuinely blessed elite who happen to be born with visible divine connections. She paused, looking out at the assembled crowd, seeing marked and unmarked faces alike listening intently. This does not mean marks do not matter, or that divine selection is meaningless, she continued carefully. The totem's choices carry significance and meaning that we should not dismiss or minimize. Marked individuals possess abilities and connections to divine power that are real and valuable and worthy of honor and respect. But what we have learned and demonstrated is that marks are one form of worth among many, one type of contribution among countless others, one piece of what makes kingdoms strong and prosperous, rather than the only piece that matters or the only measure of value and capability. Our children, 3 marked individuals born to unmarked mother, represent kingdom's future and the integration we have been working toward. Recognition that marked and unmarked are not incompatible categories or opposing teams, but complementary parts of whole, that families can include both and function beautifully, that the kingdom's strength comes from diversity and inclusion rather than from rigid hierarchies that waste talent and create resentment by excluding most citizens from opportunities to contribute fully. I am proud beyond words to serve as your queen, she concluded, her voice carrying emotion alongside conviction, grateful every single day to Darius for choosing me when I had no power by any traditional measure, committed to continuing the work of building more just and inclusive kingdom for all who call it home, regardless of whether they bear marks or possess supernatural abilities or come from privileged families. We have made significant progress in 15 years, but much work remains. There are still barriers to overcome, prejudices to challenge, systems to reform so that every citizen has genuine opportunity to develop and contribute their talents. I invite all of you, marked and unmarked alike, to join us in this ongoing work of transformation. to recognize that your worth is not determined by visible symbols, but by character and dedication and wisdom you bring to your lives and communities. Together we can build kingdom that truly honors all its people, that wastes no talent, that creates opportunities for everyone to flourish and contribute. This is my commitment to you as your queen, and I hope it is commitment we all share as citizens of Solmara. The response to her speech was overwhelming. Thousands of voices raised in approval and celebration that lasted several minutes. Marked and unmarked citizens united in recognition of what had been accomplished and what remained possible. That evening, after the public ceremonies concluded, and they could finally be alone together in their private chambers, Darius and Lina reflected on 15 years of partnership and transformation. 15 years of proving that the most unexpected choices could also be the most right. They sat together by the window overlooking the capital city, watching lights appear as darkness fell, holding hands in comfortable silence that spoke of deep connection built over years of shared challenges and victories. "Do you ever regret it?" Darius asked eventually, echoing the question he had asked periodically throughout their marriage. "Accepting my proposal, becoming queen, taking on all the challenges and opposition and constant pressure that came with choosing partnership with me? Have there been moments when you wished you had refused, had stayed safe in your library, pursuing scholarship without these additional responsibilities and complications?" Lina considered the question seriously, as she always did, giving it weight rather than offering automatic reassurance, thinking genuinely about what their partnership had cost her alongside what it had brought. "There have been moments when I regretted the loss of privacy and simple, quiet scholarship," she admitted honestly. "Times when opposition felt overwhelming, when I felt crushed by responsibilities and expectations, when I wondered if I was actually making difference or just rearranging prejudices into slightly different configurations that looked like progress without changing fundamental realities. The first years especially were brutally difficult, facing constant questioning of my adequacy, dealing with subtle and not so subtle attacks from nobles who wanted me to fail. There were nights when I cried from frustration and self-doubt, mornings when I did not want to face another day of proving myself to people determined to view me as unsuitable regardless of what I actually accomplished. But no, I do not regret the fundamental choice to accept your proposal and become your queen. That was right decision then and remains right decision in retrospect, despite all the difficulties and pain it involved. I have been able to make real difference, to open opportunities for people who would have remained trapped by circumstances of their birth, to demonstrate that worth exists independent of marks, and that the kingdom benefits from recognizing and developing all talent rather than only that which comes with divine symbols. I have built meaningful life doing work that matters, partnered with someone I love deeply, who challenges and supports me in equal measure, raised children who will help carry transformation forward into next generation. All of that justifies the difficulties and opposition, makes the hard moments worthwhile. I would make the same choice again, Darius, because choosing you and this partnership has been best decision of my life despite everything it cost and demanded. Spectacle that drew attention from across all the desert territories, thousands gathering in Solmara's central plaza to witness unprecedented union of Sun King and unmarked scholar, nobles and commoners alike curious to see whether this revolutionary marriage would actually happen or whether opposition would find some way to prevent it at the final moment. The plaza was decorated elaborately with golden banners and flame braziers, the solar lion's symbols everywhere, alongside scholarly motifs representing Lina's background, creating visual statement about integration and partnership that the marriage represented. Lina was and what their partnership represented beyond just political arrangement. Walking slowly through crowd toward the ceremonial platform where Darius waited, unmarked citizens and reform-minded nobles applauded enthusiastically, recognizing this as a historically significant moment that challenged centuries of rigid hierarchy. Permanent limitations. Darius waited at the altar with his solar lion mark blazing bright enough to cast shadows in midday sun. Everyone present could see the genuine love and respect flowing between them that made the ceremony about two people choosing each other rather than just arrangement, securing succession and alliance. To share power genuinely, rather than just making symbolic gestures toward inclusion, while maintaining all real authority. Lina promised to serve the kingdom with wisdom and dedication, to use her position to advocate for all citizens regardless of marks or status, to grow into Queen's role while also maintaining intellectual integrity and honesty that had characterized her scholarship. Even skeptics had the sense that something genuinely significant was beginning, rather than simply traditions, being violated through foolish romantic impulse. Communal meals were organized where marked and unmarked citizens ate together in unprecedented mixing of social classes. The symbolic importance was not lost on anyone, requiring constant navigation of opposition and opportunities, setbacks and victories, slow gradual transformation of kingdom's culture and structures. Lina stepped into Queen's role with determination and intelligence, opened opportunities for unmarked citizens who had been systematically excluded from meaningful participation in kingdom's leadership and advancement. She established education programs ensuring talented unmarked youth could access learning previously reserved for marked elite, institutionalizing their participation rather than making it dependent on individual rulers' personal preferences. She worked tirelessly to shift cultural narratives away from rigid hierarchies based on marks toward more inclusive understanding of worth and capability that recognized diverse forms of contribution and excellence. The opposition remained strong throughout these initiatives, nobles resisting changes that threatened their privileged positions and their children's assumed advantages, arguing that lowering standards to accommodate unmarked participants would weaken institutions and kingdom's overall capabilities. But Lina's obvious competence and dedication gradually won over even some skeptics who had initially dismissed her as unsuitable for Queen's role, demonstrating through her own example that unmarked individuals could perform at highest levels when given opportunity and support, making space for multiple forms of excellence rather than insisting only one type counted, allowing her to cite historical precedents and present careful logical reasoning that was difficult to dismiss as emotional or political rather than substantive. Darius supported her reforms actively while also managing his own responsibilities as Sun King, their partnership proving remarkably effective as they divided responsibilities according to their respective strengths and interests, trusting each other to handle their domains while also consulting on major decisions that affected both areas. He used his authority to push through policies Lina proposed, overriding opposition when necessary, but also allowed her to develop her own power base and political effectiveness rather than simply acting as proxy for his will. Their children became symbols of integration and possibility. The eldest son showed no signs of mark by age 5, causing renewed intense criticism from conservative nobles who argued this proved Lina was unsuitable queen. That unmarked bloodline diluted divine selection process and endangered dynasty. But when he turned 7, he received mark from the Night Panther rather than Solar Lion, demonstrating that divine selection operated on its own mysterious logic rather than following bloodlines as rigidly as tradition claimed. That children of unmarked parent could still receive divine attention and power. Their second and third children also received marks eventually, from Wind, Cheetah, and Fire Caracal respectively, proving that Lina's unmarked status did not prevent her children from divine connection or condemn them to unmarked lives. But more importantly, the family's visible inclusion of marked children from unmarked mother helped shift cultural understanding at fundamental level, demonstrating that marks and unmarked status were not incompatible categories with rigid boundaries, that families could include both and function successfully, that the kingdom's future lay in integration rather than rigid separation that had characterized previous centuries. Greater than /emt/user-data/outputs/temp_no_power txt and entail c10,/emt/user-data/outputs/Solaris_no_power_chosen.txt greater than mnt user-data/outputs/tap_no_power.txt and nmv mnt user-data/outputs/temp_no_power.txt/mnt/user-data/outputs Solaris Legends _no_power_chosen.txt 15 years after their wedding, standing before assembled court to celebrate anniversary of her coronation as queen, Lina spoke words that captured what their partnership had proven and what it meant for the kingdom's future. When Darius first proposed marriage, when he told me he had chosen me, despite my lack of power or mark or any quality the kingdom traditionally valued in queens, I was terrified and certain I would fail. I had no divine abilities, no supernatural power, no noble training or background. By every measure that mattered in Solmara's hierarchy, I was nothing, unsuitable, fundamentally inadequate for the role I was being asked to fill. But Darius saw something I could not see in myself, that true power is not measured by marks or abilities, but by wisdom and character and commitment to service. Over 15 years we have proven together that worth exists independent of divine selection, that unmarked individuals can contribute as meaningfully as marked ones, that the kingdom is stronger when it values all its citizens rather than just blessed elite. This does not mean marks do not matter, or that divine selection is meaningless. It means that marks are one form of worth among many, one type of contribution among countless others, one piece of what makes kingdom strong rather than the only piece that matters. Our children, marked and unmarked and everything between, represent kingdom's future, integration rather than separation, valuing each person for what they actually bring rather than just for symbols on their skin. I am proud to serve as your queen, grateful to Darius for choosing me when I had no power, committed to continuing work of building more just and inclusive kingdom for all who call it home. If this story resonates with you, if you have ever felt powerless or invisible, yet were chosen anyway, if you recognize that worth exists independent of visible achievements or recognized abilities, share your thoughts below. Subscribe to Solaris Legends for more tales of those chosen, despite having no power, of wisdom valued over supernatural abilities, of partnerships that prove love and respect matter more than traditional hierarchies. Until next time, may you recognize your own worth regardless of what marks you bear. May you find those who see you truly rather than judging by surface measures. May you remember that the most important choices are often the most unexpected.